So hello everybody and welcome. I think we can start. So first of all, thanks for joining. My name is Daniela Sica, working at Alira Health as Vice President Business Development, Pharma and Biotech. Alira is an international advisory firm focused on the healthcare and life science space, supporting pharma, medtech and biotech companies along their path towards success. I'm very pleased today to be here hosting Alira webinar about the impact of COVID-19 on clinical biomanufacturing and supply chains. Our speaker today is Stephen Chamow. Steve is Alira Health Senior Vice President, CMC Development. Steve has over 30 years of experience as a biotechnology executive and consultant. He is the founder of Chamow and Associates, a California-based advisory firm specializing in assisting biotechnology companies in designing and developing CMC strategies for products in development. The firm recently joined Alira Health, and we are pleased to have Steve here with us today. Before leaving the floor to Steve, just a few housekeeping suggestions. Please stay on mute during the presentation. You can enter your questions directly into the chat during the presentation, and Steve can address those once we get to the Q&A. So, Steve, I think it's your turn now.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniela. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to say good morning and good afternoon to all of you, wherever you might be dialing in from. Today I'm going to be talking about the challenges for clinical biomanufacturing and supply chains of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll first be talking about how our vaccine's made, and this will, I'll do a brief overview of the 4 types of vaccines that are being produced for COVID-19, and then focus on the risks to the vaccine supply, and in particular, how the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, the supply chains for those 2 vaccines differ. And then I'll shift at the end to talk about long-term impacts of the experience that we're having now. So you may have noticed that I posted several pre-reads that might be of interest to you. So Steve Banker wrote an article that was published in Forbes in November about the supply chain hurdles for the COVID vaccine. That's worth a read. Brooke Sutherland in Bloomberg Opinion in December wrote about the vaccine supply chain, and Jonathan Gardner and colleagues wrote a very nice overview in Biopharma Dive just last week that summarizes the COVID-19 vaccines, all of the clinical vaccines that I'll be talking about in here, but in more detail. So if you get a chance, you might want to check one of these out. So what I'm going to be telling you today is really summarized on this slide. We face the biggest medical manufacturing challenge in history, and it's driven by several factors. First, the sheer number of doses and the compressed time in which they are needed. Second, the number of vaccine candidates that are in play and need to be, for which manufacturing needs to be organized. And third, the fact that this is a global pandemic. These factors are placing tremendous stress on biomanufacturing capacity and on its supply chain, as I'll show you in the next few minutes. So how are vaccines made? There are 4 types of vaccines that are being produced for the coronavirus pandemic. The vaccine types are indicated on the left, and the immunogen type is next to that. So for whole virus vaccines, these are the typical design of vaccines that have worked so well as a public health measure in the past. This is an inactivated virus of the type that we have seen for smallpox, rabies, polio, and several other major health threats. The number of leading programs for COVID-19 using the whole virus vaccine is 2. Subunit vaccines. These are protein subunits. These are the spike glycoprotein, which is the component of the virus that is the focus actually of all of the virus, all of the vaccine efforts. An example of this, there are 2 commercial examples, Hep C and shingles, and 3 of the leading programs for COVID-19 are of this type. Then the majority of those under development are genetic vaccines. These are either viral vector or DNA or RNA based. Both of these are very new with little history in vaccinology. The viral vector approach was first approved in 2019 for a vaccine against Ebola. There are 4 of those being developed for COVID. And the DNA or RNA-based approach has never been used. This is technology that was just developed 10 years ago, and there are 4 of these types of programs that are underway. So how are these various virus vaccines produced? The production of these viruses or these vaccines are shown on this slide. And the main point I want to make here is that the majority of these, 4 of the 5 different types of vaccines are made using processes that involve live cells. Whole virus, protein subunit, viral vector, and DNA, all of these involve cells that contain the vaccine element to be manufactured. For protein subunit, viral vector, and DNA, it involves the synthesis of the DNA, and in these cases, it would be DNA encoding the spike glycoprotein. These are then constructed into either a recombinant plasmid or a recombinant adenovirus, and then introduced into cells that will produce the molecule of interest. So in contrast to these approaches is the RNA approach. Now, RNA is unique among the vaccine approaches in that it is completely cell-free. The RNA is synthesized in vitro using a DNA template. It is then encapsulated in a lipid nanoparticle. And that is the drug substance. It's RNA encapsulated in a lipid nanoparticle. And so it is unique among the approaches to be the only one that is cell-free. There are 13 leading vaccine candidates. And by leading, I restrict this list only to those that are currently in clinical testing. And this is a global list. So you'll notice that we have quite a number of these that are being developed in the US, in addition, China, Germany, and Russia. And of this list of 13, 5 of them are authorized for use by a regulatory agency somewhere in the world. So the first to be authorized was the Gamaleya Research Institute vaccine that was authorized in Russia during the summer, and that was without clinical data at that time. Sinopharm, down at the bottom of the list, has been authorized for limited use in China, and then the Oxford University AstraZeneca vaccine has been authorized in the US, in the UK, not yet in the US. The other 2 that are authorized for use are shown at the top, and these are highlighted. That's the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. Both of those are mRNA vaccines, and I will be featuring those 2 vaccines in the rest of my presentation. So for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, how much is needed and by when? If you look at the anticipated U.S. demand, and that's in the U.S. government goal column here, you'll see that a total of 240 million doses is anticipated to be needed by the end of July. That starts off 20 million doses in December, 100 million doses in April, and then 120 million doses in July. These are first doses only, according to the U.S. government estimates. And so you have to assume that since both of these vaccines are double shot, what we're going to need ultimately is twice that number, or 480 million doses by the end of July. And the reason for this number is that to get to a point of herd immunity, Dr. Tony Fauci at NIAID has predicted that we need to be 70 to 80% of the population of the U.S. vaccinated. That's about this number of people. So that's where we get that. So what can we make between the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines? The U.S. supply targets that have been negotiated by both of these companies together will be 400 million doses by the end of July. So you can see that when we compare the 400 million doses in supply targets to the anticipated 480 million doses that are going to be needed, these supply targets are falling a bit short of the anticipated demand. It's going to be tight, assuming that these supply targets can actually be met. It's going to be tight. So what are the risks to the vaccine supply? I want to point out that we talk a lot about capacity in our industry, and in fact, there is a difference between manufacturing capacity and the supply chain on which it relies. And in fact, I have a quote here from the CEO of Moderna. This is a quote from last week at the JPM conference, where Stefan Bankel said that sometimes people confuse capacity and supply, and then he went on to distinguish the two. And I want to make sure that we all understand that they are not the same. So I've outlined here some of the risks to the supply chain. First, raw material sourcing. So adhering to the production schedule that I've shown you on the previous slide depends on the company's ability to source raw materials and the vaccination kit supplies, for example, syringes. An example of this risk is in the second bullet, and that was last year. Pfizer's goal was to deliver 75 million doses by the end of the year. As it turned out, it delivered far fewer than that, only 25 million doses, not due to capacity constraints, but due to supply chain issues. The second risk is scheduling. A rapid and successful scale-up and scheduling to supply all of the required elements, not just the drug substance and the drug product, but all of the raw materials that then are necessary to manufacture these. Successful delivery of all of these is needed. And any shortfall of raw materials will cause a delay in production and a potential stockout. These products involve complex logistics. Both supply chains require complex distribution logistics, and in particular, for the mRNA vaccines, cold storage creates substantial challenges. And this really highlights the importance of formulation and stability studies. In the case of these two vaccines, they are stored at ultra-low temperatures, particularly the Pfizer vaccine, and that creates very substantial challenges, particularly at scale. What is the role of the Defense Production Act in the US? Well, it may be, as this year develops, it may be significant. It turns out that Pfizer's supply targets include a stipulation in its contracts with the US government that the government use the Defense Production Act to increase the availability of key vaccine ingredients if necessary for Pfizer to achieve its supply targets. So Pfizer anticipated that supply issues were likely to be encountered and in fact told the US government, you have to be willing to use the Defense Production Act to make this happen, or the risk is just too high. Well, in preparation for this presentation, I had the opportunity to interview several CDMOs who are doing COVID work, and I wanted to share the feedback that I got from these companies with you, because I think it's insightful as a window on what's going on in the trenches. So the trend at CDMOs is increasingly toward rapid process development and scale up. And the ability to leverage platform processes is a major factor in achieving the compressed timelines that we're seeing for COVID-19 vaccines. The CDMOs that I spoke to are using raw materials now at a faster pace than ever before. And in particular, bags, vials, and stoppers are critical raw materials that have been most impacted. Their formularies have been expanded to include alternate suppliers for key items to try to keep the supply chain flowing. Currently, at these CDMOs with whom I spoke, COVID projects are dominant. At one CDMO, infectious disease projects are now 50% of its total business, versus 25% just a year ago, before pre-COVID. One thing also that was clear from my discussions is that COVID has brought more stakeholders together. There is a very clear cooperative spirit. Sponsors, government, key raw material suppliers, and manufacturers are all being brought to the table. There are additional people in conversations, and as will always be the case, additional opinions. But it appears that everyone is committed and that decisions are being made quickly. And in particular, government is acting in support and largely removing roadblocks. So I was very pleased to hear that. Well, how do the Pfizer and Moderna supply chains compare? So I have on this slide some detail about the Pfizer supply chain, and we'll cover this one first. So Pfizer, as you may know, retains significant in-house manufacturing assets. It plans to make raw materials, in particular mRNA, API, and the lipid encapsulated drug substance and the finished dose drug product at its own plants. So the linearized DNA template is made in St. Louis, the mRNA is made in Andover, and the lipid encapsulated mRNA drug substance and the drug product are made in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Pfizer has also arranged for ex-US production at its own facilities. It's producing material at Puurs in Belgium and also at a new site in Marburg. And then BioNTech, its partner, will also produce the vaccine at 2 sites in Germany. The lipids that are critical raw materials for the drug substance will be supplied by a third party, that's Croda. So this is largely an in-house manufacturing supply chain. And it's quite different from the Moderna supply chain that's outlined on this slide. So initial commercial supplies for the Moderna vaccine were produced internally. That's at Moderna's facility in Norwood, Mass, which has the potential for 100 million doses annually. Now, Moderna recognized early on that its ability to manufacture a vaccine was limited, and it needed to establish external partnerships. So in April, it established a commercial supply agreement with Lonza for drug substance and with Catalent for drug product. That was established a few months later. So for Moderna, the mRNA and the lipid encapsulated drug substance and finished doses are all outsourced. The dose is small, it's a 100 microgram dose. And so consequently, the scale of production is relatively small. The drug substance production vessel, for example, is only hundreds of liters. It's not thousands of liters. The lipid encapsulated drug substance is made by Lonza, as I said, and in order to meet the demand, Lonza is building out capacity for 400 million doses annually using 4 times 100 million dose manufacturing lines, 1 at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and 3 lines in Visp, Switzerland. The drug product is filled and packaged by Catalent. The filling is at Bloomington and the packaging is in Philadelphia. And as with the Pfizer vaccine, the lipids are provided by a third party. In the Moderna case, they're provided by Corden Pharma. So what about the long-term impacts on biomanufacturing? Well, I think that there will be long-term impacts and there will be positive impacts that come out of this. And those are in the form of new investment and increased regulatory flexibility. So with regard to investment, we're seeing significant new investment and expansion of biomanufacturing and supply chains as a direct result of the requirements of COVID. And I have several examples of this shown on this slide. So Paul, for example, has invested $114 million to increase the supply of components for single-use manufacturing. Thermo Fisher has invested $700 million to add global capacity in order to meet the COVID-related demand. Fujifilm, $928 million invested in its biomanufacturing site in Denmark, and an additional $40 million for a new site to manufacture viral vectors in Massachusetts. At Emergent, expansion at that facility is being fast-tracked. A new drug product viral line will be built in 18 months rather than the standard 36 months in order to meet the demand that Emergent is seeing from COVID vaccine projects. And Lonza it has announced the investment of $2 billion in capital in biomanufacturing capacity worldwide. So we are seeing a substantial new investment flowing into the industry. This is by no means a complete list. I think if you look around, we're seeing a significant investment in many phases, many sectors of biomanufacturing. In addition to this, I think we're going to see increased regulatory flexibility as a result of the negotiations that have gone on and the experiences that we've had now around COVID with FDA and regulatory agencies worldwide. We, and that's the innovators and FDA, have learned that we can move faster to develop clinical products, and we can do that in a way that does not compromise safety. So I think we're going to see some of this flexibility that we're seeing with COVID products be incorporated longer term. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention over the past 25 minutes, and I'll be happy to entertain questions.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think we have some questions here that I can read for you. So the first question, sorry, they're arriving a lot of questions now, and I cannot read the first one anymore. So the first one is, I wonder whether these numbers are also taking into consideration latest Biden's claim to have 100 million in his first 100 days in office.
Yes, they are. Let's see, if we go back to this slide, you see 100 million doses. So his first 100 days in office would be through April. And so 100 million doses, and these are first doses only, are incorporated there in that number.
Okay, thank you. The other question, oh, sorry.
Daniela, let me just also say that the 120 million goal for July is based on on a statement, and this was by Alex Azar in the Trump administration, that the government's goal would be to allow to have enough doses that by the end of July, anybody who wants to be vaccinated could be vaccinated. So I then translated that to how many more do we need in order to get to the 240 million number, and that's where I came up with this.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, are there solutions that can be implemented to make more vaccine ingredients and raw materials available?
Can you repeat that, please?
Are there solutions that can be implemented to make more vaccine ingredients and raw materials available?
I mean, the solutions would be, as we've talked about here, encouraging raw materials suppliers to expand their capacity and their ability to manufacture raw materials to feed this schedule. So, for example, the lipid manufacturers that I spoke of that provide the raw materials to Pfizer and Moderna, those companies are increasing their own investment in capacity in order to ramp up production. Syringe manufacturers are under tremendous pressure, and I think similarly they're trying to increase their production in order to deal with this demand. And then ultimately there is the use of the Defense Production Act, and I fully anticipate at some point here in 2021 we're going to see that measure brought to bear, because it has the impact to be able to focus resources to where they're needed most in order to feed the supply chain.
Thank you, very clear. Then we have another question. Thermosensitivity of RNA vaccines has an impact on supply chain, but what about manufacturing? Is temperature management impacting the ability of vaccine manufacturing sites to upscale?
Within the manufacturing process itself, the feedback I got from the CDMOs is that yes, that does represent a challenge for them. The fact that these vaccines do require ultra low temperature storage. I think the bigger challenge is not in manufacturing so much as it is in distribution, and particularly in storage and and distribution to clinics, because manufacturing facilities tend to have access to ultra low temperature storage, but as we move out toward clinics and the sites where these products are being administered, ultra low temperature storage is not the norm. It's certainly not the norm outside the US, and so I think that's where the bigger challenge is going to be.
Thank you. Now we have an additional one. The AstraZeneca product is a viral vector vaccine. Will this vaccine present fewer logistical challenges than we have with the mRNA vaccines?
I think the short answer is yes, in large part because the viral vector vaccines are more stable. Because they're viruses, they are not, liposome formulations of isolated mRNA. So they're stable, either refrigerated or even at room temperature. They don't require the cold chain logistics that we need with the mRNA vaccines. So I think for that reason, you probably read this, that the AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be more widely distributed ex-US because of the fact that ultra low temperature storage is not required. So yeah, I think it's not going to present the same challenges that we have here.
Okay. And I think we have a last question. What is it about the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines that causes the difference in shipping and storage temperature?
So you probably know that the Pfizer vaccine requires storage at -70 or below. The Moderna vaccine, not so much. -20 can be used there. I think the difference is in the lipid formulation, the liposome formulation, and the particular chemical makeup, composition of the liposomes. Moderna has had nearly a decade of work to investigate and optimize liposome formulations for mRNA products of this type, and so they've I think they're pretty much leading the industry in liposome formulations of this type. So you could argue that the Moderna liposome formulation is a more stable one than the BioNTech formulation, and that's why we're seeing the difference in the temperature.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are done with the questions. I don't see any other question arriving on our chat. So thanks, Steve, for sharing your experience and expertise on this matter, and thanks everyone for joining. If you would like to get in touch with our speakers, please see our emails in the chat, so Steve's email and my email. And if you would like to have more details about Alira, just reach out to our website, alirahealth.com, and we will get back to you with all the answers you need. So thanks again, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.